Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
All right, we'll call this Tuesday, June 18th, 2019 informational meeting to order. Thanks to all who are here and those who are watching. We'll get things started with City Council open discussion. Anybody have anything? Councilor Staley.
Yes, thank you. This morning at 9 o'clock, I was able to go over to the McKinnon campus and observe the transporting of two of the homes in the rezone that the council approved several months ago. And Alan Hof was the guy in charge, Telcamp House Moving. And do we have some of those pictures, Jim? Yeah, there he is. I saw that on Facebook that it was on the news that they were moving these. You can go to the next one. And this company from Brookings, actually, he said that they moved all the homes on the north part of the Avera campus in the last 10, 15 years. It was interesting because he said Avera has been very open to relocating these homes, and his company actually relocated the homes on the northern part of our city up on, I think it's called Presentation Drive. They created a little housing development. He said Sanford doesn't seem to have the same appetite for rescuing and rehabbing the homes. They're more inclined to destroy the homes that in the path of development. Jim, you can go to the next one, please. Here's some of the crew. And the homes, these are the two homes that they were moving out at the time. They did them as a pair. Go ahead to the next one. Yeah, and then they were actually in boom trucks, and then they had poles. Mid-Continent and Xcel Energy was out. They were both out trying to adjust the lines to move this through. And they said that, I said, how much is this going to cost? They're taking these two homes up to North Duluth Avenue. And he said that it'd be about $30,000 to transport those today. So it's kind of an interesting experience. This home, however, and they said this one, there's 4 homes involved. This one was the most impressive, is what the house movers said. And unfortunately, they're going to have to destroy it because it's too large to transport through town. They said it's too challenging. So that's the end of that story. So I just wanted to say, and I put this on Facebook, not at meeting time, of course, but this morning. And I said, thank you to the Avera McKinnon and to the Presentation Nuns for their willingness to make this a positive, despite I really didn't want to see any of those homes moved out of that neighborhood, but they made the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What an exciting weekend it was this last weekend in Sioux Falls. There were so many exciting things that we got to participate in, whether it was the Levitt Shell opening, the Peach Festival, the Pride Festival, Les Mis at the Pavilion with 7 almost, I would think really close to 7 fully sold out shows. I mean, Sioux Falls was buzzing. And now for the 3rd weekend in a row, there will be an opportunity to celebrate diversity in Sioux Falls. A Juneteenth celebration, Celebrate Freedom event will take place Saturday the 22nd from 11 to 4 in Terrace Park West. There'll be music, inflatables, and food vendors. Everyone's welcome to attend. And you may or may not know, but Juneteenth celebrates informing slaves in Galveston, Texas, that they were free 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. It's going to be a wonderful time, and this is a multi-year celebration that, again, celebrates diversity in our community and a chance to learn a little bit of history and pass on to our kids that we're only a few generations away from slavery. It's really not that far away. In fact, at one of the Living Library presentations, my son, who is biracial, had a chance to meet someone who her grandparents were slaves. It just blew his mind and blew my mind that you could actually talk to the granddaughter of someone who was a slave. And to be able to celebrate Juneteenth is going to be great for our community and great for those that are really involved. So I would invite you to attend. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I just wanted to share a little bit. I know I've been gone quite a bit. And this last week, I had the opportunity to travel with my son's soccer team from here in Sioux Falls, obviously. There were 6 teams from the Sioux Falls area that made it to the Midwest Regionals in Kansas City. And so I think that's quite an accomplishment for the soccer club and for opportunities for sports for our youth. Of those 6 teams, 3 of them made it to the finals, and the U14 girls won the finals, and they'll travel to Tennessee for the finals. And so unfortunately, our team lost in the finals, but to have that representation for Sioux Falls and South Dakota with 8 or 9 different states represented is quite an accomplishment and shows how far we've come in kind of the sports world for Sioux Falls. So just wanted to share the good news of how well our teams did. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, thanks everybody. We'll move on to the presentations for today, and we'll start with Director Pritchett, the May 2019 monthly financials. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Sean Pritchett with Finance. Here presenting the May financial report. So we'll just jump right into that here. And as we usually start, just kind of talking about some of the local economic conditions. Nothing significant or materially changing here. Still positive news on many fronts. Our unemployment rate continued to drop in in April, dropping to 2.4%, down from 2.8% in January. So continuing to see that decrease over time as we continue with our full employment status here in Sioux Falls. And we continue to see those trends both nationally and within the state of South Dakota as well. As far as labor force and employment, we continue to see slow and steady growth here. One thing I wanted to point out is over the last 12 months, we've added about slightly over 5,000 people, both in terms of labor force and employment. So that accounts for about a 3.5% increase in our total labor force in the community in the last year. Inflation dropped slightly in the last month, down to 1.8%, driven again by the volatility in the energy sector, which went down in the May timeframe. So we're averaging about 1.8% over the last 6 months as well. Building permits, trend-wise, very similar to what we've seen over the past couple of months here. Some additional strength came in certain sectors in May. So we actually went ahead of 2017's level, which was a historic year at that time, and it ended the month with $274 million worth of building valuation and permits, and that is through the first 5 months of the year. Some of the continuing things that we've seen trending, new residential values are down about 16% from where they were 2 years ago. They're down about 10% from where they were at this point last year. That is being driven by single-family housing, as we discussed in previous years as well, or excuse me, in previous months. New commercial is also down about 8% from 2 years ago, and it's down about 31% since May of 2018. This is driven primarily by the office, institutional, and educational sector, which had a significant increase. It was at $64 million last year. It's at about $5 million this year. So that was a kind of an uptick that occurred in 2018. That was a little unusual, but our other commercial building is up in that category. Apartments which made a rebound in April, kind of we're down again this month with only 8 new permits issued for 8 units. As we've seen in previous months for this year, we are seeing a trending towards additional and remodeling. So both on the residential and the commercial side, we see that residential remodeling and additions is up 44%, commercial additions and remodeling is up 26%. And while these are smaller relative to new additions or new building construction, both on the residential and commercial side, it certainly is showing the trending that's occurring within the local economy as people are gearing more towards that remodeling and additions rather than building new. As far as focusing on the actual residential permits, so we had, through May of 2019, 247 single-family units issued, 295 multifamily units issued, and 112 townhome units issued. Single-family is down 19% in terms of total units. Apartments and multifamily, as I said, we only had 8 units that were permitted in May after a really strong April, but we remained down about 26% over where we were last year, but we had a very strong year last year, and not surprising to see some correction occurring within the apartment and multifamily sector. And townhomes actually made a significant rebound. We have 112 permits issued for townhomes. 48 of those occurred in the month of May. So we're seeing that correct itself, getting back to the level that we had seen in previous years. Sales tax collections were positive, very positive in May, where we saw a strong month, about 9.4% increase over where we were for May of 2018. Again, May of 2018 wasn't as strong of a month, so it's easier to have that larger increase, but it has been positive. We see the rolling 12-month getting up to 5.3% as of May, and that's the one that we look at more closely because it kind of takes out the trending, and we watch that trending is on an upward trajectory right now. We were, by comparison, at 4.7% of a 12-month rolling average last month, 4.5% at the end of last year. So seeing some positive news there in terms of our sales tax collections over time. And this is about the highest level that we've seen for that rolling 12-month in about 3 years. So positive as we're kind of moving into the budget for the next year as well. And then also on the entertainment tax collections, we saw good growth here as well. We've had 7 months of positive growth within this sector, or for this particular tax, entertainment taxes, which can be more volatile, so you see a lot of more up and down activity occurring there. We've also seen the 12-month rolling average for entertainment tax collections go up to 6.2% for the last 12 months, and that compares to 5% for last month. So based on a really strong May, we're seeing that average over the last 12 months grow over time. Overall, in terms of the general fund revenues, overall revenues to the budget, so we're about 42% through the year. We're at 43% expended, so very similar to where we were last year at 44% expended, and very much in line where we were the year before. So we're seeing still consistency there in terms of our total revenues. In terms of specific revenues to highlight, property taxes, which had been running a little bit behind and we had expected them to catch up, so we're at about 46% of the budget with the first half of the property tax collections in for that major push for the year. We were at 49% last year, but we are seeing ourselves get back to where we were expecting in terms of the budget, so there's not really any material concerns there. As we talked about previously, bank franchise taxes have come in over what we had expected for budget. And sales taxes, we're at 42% of budget for the year, exactly where we were last year and ahead of where we were in 2017 relative to the size of our budget expectations. So overall, nothing really major concern there. If we turn our attention to the expenditure side, kind of the same story going on here as well. We're, again, 42% of the way through the year. We're about 35% expended currently, and that's tracking exactly in line with where we had been last year. We continue to monitor a couple of budgets closely, but most are in line in normal expectations. As we had talked about previously, highways and streets are at 46% expended versus 43% last year and 36% the year before. This is being driven by that snow, as we talked about. Our snow removal budget is about 91% expended for the year, so depending on how this fall goes, we'll have some impact there. We do expect that there will be a provisional budget request coming in similar to last year. Our expectation is that will be about $1.5 million. And we are expecting to spend that as part of what we're building where our revenues and where our reserves will be going into next year's budget. So we do have expectations, but hopefully similar to last year, we can ask for the provisional approval and not have to use it as we did last year. So, unfortunately, sales taxes are coming in a way to support that additional expenditure too. As I mentioned, we're kind of going into our budget timeframe right now, which you're all well aware of. And before the end of the month, we'll be submitting the 5-year capital improvement plan to the council, so you can begin your review of that. At the end of July, we'll be providing and submitting the proposed budget for the city. for the consideration and moving into budget hearings following that in the month of August. In preparation for that and kind of getting geared up, I thought I'd take an opportunity to hopefully you can oblige me a few minutes to talk about the budget process that we went through this year and kind of how we got to here. Not so much what's in the budget, but just kind of what process we went through to try to engage the public and our departments in a more robust budgeting strategy. So as we kind of looked at the budget for this year, there are certain things that we wanted to do to really encourage more feedback and participation in our budgeting process. So one of those was to engage the public as well as to engage more city departments. Clearly the departments are engaged as part of the budgeting process, but not always necessarily collectively or together. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is develop processes that would get them engaged to working together, hearing their different budget proposals, so there was an understanding across the departments on what different departments' needs were, and look for opportunities for collaborations, efficiencies, and those types of things. So as I talk through the process, that's kind of one of the things that we kind of took into account as we wanted to move forward. Another one was trying to foster partnerships, and people talk a lot about partnerships, but we really wanted to focus on how we engage with external partners as well as partners within the city. So again, working more collaboratively between the departments, but also working with outside stakeholders in ways that we can help leverage resources to the benefit of the city and the services that we're providing. And some of that is, and I always say partnerships means that you really have to be true partners. It means both partners bring resources to the table, and that could be in the form of capital or financial resources, but it can also be in the form of just active participation and working together and knowledge base and experiences. And so that has really kind of driven us in terms of the things that we wanted to see from the budget requests that the departments were providing as well. We wanted to make sure we were focusing our limited resources so that we could really target specific areas and have meaningful impact in those areas, rather than just trying to do too many things and not doing anything particularly well, but just really trying to focus, and not saying that we don't do things well, but just trying to focus our limited resources that we have on specific areas that we would want to see improvements on. And so that was part of our process as well. And finally, we wanted to incorporate components of innovation, data, and measurability to make sure that with the investments that we're making, that there's accountability to those investments and that we can try to measure the impact that they're having going forward, and not just in terms of outputs that are being creative, but outcomes. Like, are we moving the needle? And so that was really a factor in what we were trying to work with the departments on, is how do we measure those impacts. With the budget process, kind of started here with the city council as you had engaged in your own working sessions and set some priorities for what you felt from what you hear from constituents should be important priorities for consideration. And so those were taken into account and considered as we kind of moved into the budgeting process, and those occurred in February and March. In March and April, we asked the departments to provide proposals, similar to like an RFP process, but we called them requests for results. And we asked them for new initiatives, for new investments or major changes in their existing budget authority. We asked them to provide a short 2-page summary proposal on what they would like to see accomplished. And what we did with those requests for results is to engage in a system where we set up a couple of different committees, and it was made up of cross-departmental committees. It was made up of directors, but we also engaged other staff within the city. We wanted to engage people that didn't always get an opportunity to be involved in the budget process, so that we could hear from them and get the feedback from them and get their ideas and build those into the budget process as well. So we had a very active preparation and part of that. In April, we met with several of those committees over a series of about 3 days and reviewed those different results and gathered all the feedback that they had. From that, we knew we also wanted to be more active about engaging the public as part of the budgeting process. And it's something that is more challenging. We want it to be meaningful. We didn't just want to hold a public town forum and then have 3 people participate and really not get the kind of feedback that we wanted to give us ideas, valuable ideas that could be part of the budgeting process. So for this year, what we wanted to try and we piloted was working with Leadership Sioux Falls. They were just kind of getting into their the end or conclusion of their Leadership Sioux Falls class. They were about to go through their graduation. We had a whole bunch of people that were very engaged and excited about contributing to the community. So we had about 20 of those Leadership Sioux Falls people volunteer to be a part of the process. And we met with them over a series of 2 days. We spent about 4 hours with 2 different sessions with those participants, so we split them in half. And we really had an opportunity for them to look at a select set of those RFRs. So we picked a few of those RFRs that had more of a public-facing component to them that would be of a higher degree of interest to them from a public feedback perspective, and we asked them what they liked, what they disliked. We also got an opportunity to ask them, what we could be doing better. And it was very interesting to see, many of the things that we were hearing back from them we can reflect back to even what the council was presenting in terms of some of your priorities as well. So it was interesting to kind of see this all come together as part of this process. And then finally, in terms of just general public input, the mayor went to social media, which is a great medium for getting people who don't have a lot of time to provide feedback to be able to provide short, concise feedback that in a way that the younger generation is used to working with. And so had a whole bunch of comments coming in through that medium, and really valuable that kind of reinforced some of the things that seem to be resonating in the other kind of feedback opportunities that we had. But also they brought some new ideas that will be taken into consideration, not just in this year's budget process, but things as we leap into next year's budget process. The last thing I'll leave you with, and then I'll answer any questions you have, is hopefully as you see this, it's not just about changing the process, but we're also trying to change the way we present the budget to make it more accessible to public citizens. It's difficult when you lay a budget in front of somebody with literally probably 300 pages of just numbers. It doesn't tell most people anything about what the city is really doing. So whether it's from the mayor's address all the way down to the budget books that we prepare, you should see more narrative, and it'll change a little bit in the way that we do some of our budget presentations for the hearings to you as well. That we're trying to tell the story of what we're doing, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it, so that it's more accessible to the citizens at large, to have a good understanding of what their government is doing here in the community. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what's to come in terms of the budget process, and would be excited to hear your feedback as we go through this first year of my being involved with the finance department, and getting your feedback as we look to continue to grow it over time as well. So.
Thank you, Director. Anybody have any questions? Director Kiley. I'm sorry, Councilor Kiley.
Gee, does that come with a pay increase then? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's good news. Unemployment 2.4%, which is a double-edged sword. It's tough to attract new industry when we don't have a workforce available. This indicates that just about anybody that wants to work is working. Although you stated that our labor force and employment has increased 3.5%. Do you know what's our population increase for this past year? I don't know that I've heard that. We're 6 months into this year, and I'm not sure that I missed that.
I didn't pull those numbers, and I'll try to include that with my next presentation back to the council, but my recollection is it usually is about 2% a year.
It's in that vicinity. So we're seeing some
growth in the labor force side, which is positive.
Correct. You are correct that it's usually in that 2.5%. Of course, in South Dakota, we often have multiple members of a family employed or out in the workforce, so that could reflect a little higher increase. Maybe some of our workforce labor programs are bearing some fruit too, which is important for us to continue to focus on, I think, as we move into this next budget cycle. The sales tax collections, highest in 3 years, that's great. One thing I would caution us to be careful with the next budget. It's nice to assume that we're going to continue to ride high like this. However, with the start of the ag year, with farmers not being able to get into the fields until just recently, and prices really haven't gone up yet, threats of embargoes coming quite frequently yet, I am concerned about our ag economy, and we know that that is a driving factor with our Sioux Falls economy as well. So I know that Councilor Sale had expressed concern over this past budget, and I would just encourage you to be careful and consider all of those things as you move forward too. I'm sure you will.
Yeah, and I've expressed concerns similar, and I share your concerns in regard to the ag economy as it stands right now. We're kind of factoring, okay, what's the impact of the ag economy? What's been the factor of the internet sales that we're receiving now from online purchases? So I think we're kind of feeding that in. We're cautiously optimistic to see, it's always good to see positive numbers occurring right now. I think there's going to be some sort of residual effect, continuing residual effect. We've had some of that already factored in from the ag economy, but it continues to be a challenge for us looking forward. The nice thing is, for us as a city where we are at now, based on very conservative approaches that have been taken and a couple of good years where we've seen, particularly last year where our sales taxes were coming in excess of what we were projecting. We are in a position right now where we're kind of on the upward swing of our reserves, and so it does provide us some flexibility and some capacity to make modifications in the future. I mean, those reserves, you know, as we look 5 years out, we're always trying to gauge, okay, when is that next fire station coming online? Because that is going to, you know, impact, you know, 15 additional FTEs, and we want to be able to, we're keeping above those policy thresholds that have been set by the council, and so we're consistently looking at that, you know, 5, 6, 7 years out to make sure that we're staying in line with that, and we have that expectation that we you know, utilize some of that reserve in those out years because we're going to need it. So right now we've got good reserves. The benefit of that right now is that it provides us the flexibility to make adjustments in year 2, year 3 as necessary if things don't come into expectations too. So that is a positive thing for us as we look forward.
I do agree that the reserves, that is positive. We do owe it to the citizens to spend that wisely or to use it wisely. And to hold on to it because we never know when the next ice storm or event is going to come along that might you just can't possibly budget for. But at the same time, we don't want to accumulate higher and higher reserves because it is the citizens' money. So good job. I appreciate the report.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you, Director. It was nice to be able to go through this, and I'm trying to put this in the right tone so you understand, or so that we can be on the same page. It's difficult for me to digest this when I got the information just a few minutes before the meeting. I need Friday afternoon by end of day so that I can ask intelligent questions and have a chance so that I'm not, during your presentation, trying to digest the numbers. One of the things that I did get over the weekend, you know, the mayor shared some of the numbers with us. And then one of our citizens, Mark Weber, does an excellent job of review. I don't know if you're on his email list, but Mr. Weber really puts it into, breaks it down into some numbers that really make sense and have to kind of break it down and take a little bit of it. So I'm going to reserve some of my questions just because I haven't had time to really adjust and get an idea of where we're at. So. And
I apologize for that. We did get it emailed out earlier this morning, but
not enough.
Our goal is to get it out Friday, and so I was out of town, so that was a factor, and I apologize for that.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Staley?
Sean, just on slide 6, could you go back to that page? Just over there with the city council budget thing, or page 6, excuse me. Slide 12. I think we reworked this, and thank you for taking the consideration of the council's budget work into to the mix of what you're possibly putting into your budget. But I think we reworked this, just in case you were looking at this very much as far as ranking, we reworked this so that the numbers actually reflected, like if there were 2 votes, that was farther down than, you notice the way they have it here, some of the things that got 1 vote got more weight than the things with 2 votes. So I believe Dave Bixler reworked that to reflect actual votes as to the ranking. So just so that you are aware of that. Maybe Dave could get you that updated chart that we did. And the second thing I wanted to ask, on the slide 11, the last point, incorporate components of innovation data and measurability in considering new investments. And I don't know that, I'm only bringing this up because you're talking in generalities about city affairs, but I have heard concern from some citizens about this event center survey that went out, that they are asking if you're a registered voter on that. And also there seems to have, I've gotten response back from people that if you've been in the city longer than 10 years, it's kicking back your application. So, but back to the registered voter, why would we even need to know if someone's a registered voter as we collect, their input?
I was not involved in that specific survey. I was aware of it, but so I can't provide an answer necessarily to that question.
So I mean, when you're talking about data and measurability, that kind of thing, when you're asking questions that go beyond just the input asked for, it creates a sense in the citizens' mind, some of the citizens, that maybe the city is collecting data for other purposes. Someone has gone so far as to say that perhaps the mayor's administration is trying to collect voter information for an election. His election, somebody else's. That probably isn't true, but I'm just saying that it creates that doubt. So as you're working on getting data and measurability and input, I would just caution you against asking questions that go past what the scope of the issue at hand.
And I think more so this is a reflection of not necessarily survey data, but really getting people and departments to think in terms of, not just performing a service, but what service are you attempting to do and how do we measure that it's having a meaningful impact? And that's usually coming from a third-party data source, whether it's crime statistics or something of that nature, that's generated from that. Not necessarily from a survey, though it's not outside of the realm of possibility that you would use surveys to generate people's, how do they feel about, how the roads are in the community. That's important qualitative data as well, but you can kind of see where.
Exactly, but if you're asking people how they feel about the roads, you don't need to be asking them if they're registered voters. That would not be pertinent to that at all. So, my 2 cents.
Sounds good.
Okay. Councilor Brecky.
Just a quick statement. I'm excited to see how you're involving the public in the budget process, and having made me familiar with what you're doing in an interdepartmental level. Very excited about that. It's very clear to me that this administration is open to a budget process that is much more inclusive, both at the employee and department head level, and to the public. And I'm seeing you put that into place, and I think it's very exciting. And so I'm just, want to give kudos to that, and I look forward to the results. And it will be interesting because the follow-up question is going to be, what kind of valuable information did you receive now that you reached, you cast your net broader that you might not have received the other time, the other way of doing it. So I'll be looking forward to this, following this process all the way through and seeing what benefits are derived from the new process that you're putting into place. So thanks.
Thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate this. Well, 2.4% is certainly something to celebrate. I know it does come with challenges as well. I was recently traveling, and the unemployment of that particular country was 27%. And so for them to talk politics with me about what's going on in our city and our state versus what's going on in their country was really fascinating, and they were really interested in how we do things here. And so I know I've talked to you a little bit about that. So both sides come with extreme challenges, and so it's good news that people are working and people earn their keep here. So I appreciate that. I also wanted to just give you a huge thank you for communicating the new budget process. I think that this is a great step in the right direction. Oftentimes government operates in silos, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing in all aspects, whether it's federal government, local, even state. I've witnessed that, one department may be doing something and not even realizing that some of that is overlapping. And those simple quality assurance things can save thousands of dollars in making efficiencies when needed. And so that's a great checks and balance. I also appreciate finding innovative ways to make things run smoother as well, because technology is changing the way that we do business, it's changing the way we live, it's changing the way we measure data, and so I think it's exciting. We've got to embrace that or we'll be left behind. Generally in South Dakota, we're not on the cutting edge of technology. We kind of like to make sure everybody else does it, and then we kind of come in and learn from it, which isn't all bad either, but I'm grateful that you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit and challenging the other departments to making sure it makes sense and not just spending money for the sake of spending it. So thank you for your work in this. I don't have a question, just a statement.
Okay, anybody else? I think the idea that you have of creating that narrative where you're trying to make things a lot more understandable to people that are that are engaging in the budget and trying to read, like you say, instead of just looking at 300 pages, what does it mean, and doing that type thing. It'll be fun to see how that rolls out, and especially if people get involved with that. So great idea on that. 2 questions. If my notes are correct, you said a 3.5% increase in the labor force over the last year. Is that correct?
Correct, yep.
Is that about normal? Was it about the same last year? Is that a trend that's...
I believe it's a little bit more than we had been seeing in the previous 12-month period. I don't have that number in front of me, but I was surprised to see it at 3.5% when our population has been more in that 2 and 2.5%, as Councilor Kiley has.
Is there a goal for that, like for the last year to this year, hoping for?
Hoping that we can continue to see that improve over time, and right. I think hopefully there's been a lot of investments made in workforce development in this community, recognizing how important that is to our businesses. So hoping to see that continue over time.
Right. I thought that was a very optimistic number as well. And this might be a silly question, because obviously in an ideal world, everybody should have a job. But is there a time when what is the ideal unemployment rate? I mean, 0, you'd go, yeah, but I mean, do you sometimes look in a total economy and go, boy, it's a 1, this is too low, how do you look at that?
You know, economists used to say 3% was full employment.
Okay.
Because there's always transactionary unemployment where people are always between jobs, or they decide to step out of the workforce temporarily because of something that may be going on in their life, whether it's a sick child or a sick parent, and they go back into the workforce 3 or 4 months later. I think there's some people that are now believing full employment is now at 2% because we have been so low for so long that this seems to be kind of a new normal for us. But certainly the concerns with being able to have that workforce available, what we haven't seen is it hasn't put pressure on inflation yet, but if we continue to be at this level for too long, especially as we see the national level coming down so close to ours, I mean, we can be a microcosm and continue to have low unemployment without seeing general prices increase. But if you see the entire nation get to that extent, you will start seeing, I believe, those prices and inflation starting to come in. And that's why I think people are watching the Federal Reserve very closely in terms of what their next step is going to be.
Great answer. Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for that one. Next on the agenda, Councilor Staley, the floor is yours to present your cell phone proposal.
This is going to be divided into 2 parts. Councilor Brecky is co-signing this, or she's kind of a second impetus on this, so she's going to get up and give a little presentation as well. But before we start, I was going to ask our City Attorney Stacy Koister if he would come up here for a minute. I have a question, just as a baseline clarification, and we had a conversation about this yesterday, but just so we understand as a council, what is our expectation of privacy I'll start with during a council meeting with laptops being used, with cell phones being used as it is now? What do we have an expectation that those are private conversations, or would they be considered public, open to the public?
Stacy Koistra, City Attorney. That's frankly the standard lawyer answer on that is it depends. There are a whole lot of different aspects to that, both legal and ethical, and so I'm not sure exactly.
But if you're using a city laptop, do you have an expectation of privacy at a city council meeting? If anything that is being, a few years ago, we had a council member who was watching some kind of TV show during the meeting, and that was found to be inappropriate. So, and when we open our computers up, it says that we don't have an expectation of privacy, that anything done, any business done on that computer is open to, it could be open to scrutiny.
Sure, and there's a disclaimer on there when you click in, and there's an archive that keeps everything. So.
Okay, so that's kind of going to be that's going to be an issue moving forward as to what is personal, what is not. We're calling this, as it moves forward, the Transparency and Communication Ordinance. Integrity of the meeting and public input. The city's ordinances are silent on the use of electronic communication devices by council members. And of course, as things have evolved, there are a number of ways that we can communicate. And many of us have our cell phones up here. I think we've all engaged in some kind of cell phone communication during meetings. We have our laptops. I guess there's watches that will do texting as well. So there's all sorts of ways of using communication with technology. A year ago, we revised the public input policy of how citizens address us. We had a huge discussion about that, and we were going to put it to the back of the meeting where citizens could talk with us, and instead we left that at the beginning. We limited their ability, a citizen's ability to speak to us, to 3 minutes on a non-agenda item. And then we said if it's first reading, they can speak for 3 minutes. If it's a second reading, they can speak for 5 minutes. But that citizen, in order to talk with us, needs to be here in person. And we did set a precedence when we were talking about the vacation of the Elmwood Street, because there was a woman who wanted to give testimony over her phone, Mary Ann Hofer, and the council, they denied that ability to do that. So we've said that there's certain limitations to when citizens can address us and give us information during the meeting. So the public has a structured opportunity, as I said. The council has structured opportunities to debate and discuss agenda items. We can't just be talking about things at any time. It's after the first reading is read into acceptance or the second reading. So it's just, some people may not realize it, but it's just not a free-for-all up here where we can just be talking back and forth at any time. There are certain structures in place. When we have electronic communication during the council meeting from the public, it is public input. If I'm receiving a text from someone during the meeting, it's public input. If I'm receiving an email, it's public input. Even if I don't respond to them, that is public input. And I have a citizen who on social media admitted that he is actively engaging several of you at one time during a meeting. So what's happening is that person has an opportunity to have public input throughout the whole meeting, instead of the other people who might be sitting here who are only allowed to address us during that one specified time. So some people are being allowed unfettered access to council members if they happen to have the right relationship with the council members. And this, to me, and to I think a lot of citizens, needs to be addressed. Integrity of the meeting and public input. Ensure that all citizens have equal access to their elected officials at city council meetings, and we are following the public input ordinance. The issues to be addressed that I think we need to discuss are the texting, emailing, and other forms of electronic correspondence. That could be correspondence from citizens, staff members, and also the correspondence that is happening between council members. And I will say, when I was first on the council 3 years ago, we were texting each other, especially during that administration building. There was, and I saved all those texts. So there was correspondence happening between us. I've since, as has gone on, I don't do that anymore because I just didn't feel that it had the integrity within it. The practice of conducting personal business during city council meetings. You know, we're paid to be here. I think citizens expect us to be paying attention to the issue at hand. Is it okay to be conducting business? Is it okay to be responding to emails during council member meetings? Even if they're city emails, is that a good time to be doing that? Is that what citizens want from us and that we're going to set as a standard for ourselves? So the impact of electronic communication on the public meeting process. So the questions that we need to consider as we're having this discussion is the unrestricted use of electronic correspondence during official city council meetings. Is it appropriate? Is it ethical? And is it legal? So with that, I will ask Councilor Brecky to come up and talk about her concerns.
Thank you, council members. First, I just want to start out with just a little bit of history, and I just kind of want to frame up the issue and then try to engage the fellow council members in a positive, discussion of where we go from here. And as a point of background, I mean, with the new technologies constantly changing and emerging, I mean, I think our processes and our procedures have to change as well. You know, when they become a problem or when they become an issue. And I would just go back, I mean, I'm old enough to go back to copy machines, before even fax machines. And so watching different things happen over the years has been fascinating. And now it just seems to happen so much faster with all the new technologies. The last one I remember of consequences was when emails came on the scene and how to deal with emails. And all of a sudden we were tripping over open meeting laws because people were doing reply all. And all of a sudden, you know, we were trying to advise council members on, you know, how to handle things so that we weren't violating open meeting laws. When I came back 14 years later, I see that they have do not reply all. So we modified something to accommodate, you know, a new technology to, you know, to keep in compliance with open meeting laws and other, you know, procedures as well. So this is not a new discussion. I think it's an ongoing discussion as things, you know, happen. So I would like to just frame it up that way. So, you know, again, if you look at it that way, we're at a new place, we have new technologies, and, you know, how they fold into our meeting structure is something, you know, it's a policy that we need to, I think, work on together as a group. And so what I'd like to do is just go through a little bit what I would call setting the framework for this discussion. And so where I go to look for that, for the guidance on that, is, you know, I go to the code of ethics, you know, to begin with. You know, what is it that we're trying to accomplish in our open meeting setting? I mean, at these meetings, they're noticed, the items on the agendas are listed, so, you know, we're required to follow those, we're required to follow open meetings. That's the framework that's in place. You know, if you look to the code of ethics, it kind of tells you what you're trying to accomplish. And I'll just start out with, you know, in your meeting decorum, and I'll start out with the ethics preamble, which says, the stability and proper operation of democratic representative government depends upon the continuing consent of the governed, upon the public confidence in the integrity of the government, and upon responsible exercise of the trust conferred by the people. Government decisions and policy must be made and implemented through proper channels and processes of the governmental structure. And I would point out, to me, that the key words there is we want to create a system or have an ongoing system that generates public confidence, that, you know, in the integrity of the government, in the integrity of the process. And we want to do it in a way that we have processes in place and structure in place, you know, that create that ongoing integrity and confidence. The second one is the second half. That was a long, the preamble's kind of long, so I broke it into 2 slides.
but I think there's some good guidance there. The purpose of this code is to establish guidelines for ethical standards of conduct for city council members. City council members must act in a manner that maintains their integrity and independence, yet is responsive to the interests and needs of those they represent. City council members must act in a fair and impartial manner. City council members must be aware of their obligation to conform their behavior to the standards of ethical conduct that warrant the trust of their constituents. So again, as I approach this subject and approach this dialogue, I want to be thinking about that. How do we set this up? How do we handle this issue in a way that generates the trust of our constituents? Because that is something that we all want. Canon 3, a city council member should avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all his or her activities. And Canon 4, city council members should, while performing the duties of the office as prescribed by law, give precedence to those duties over other activities. And again, I thought that was helpful as we engage this dialogue, in this world of multitasking. Where does multitasking, interfere in what our duties and our obligations are, and interfere in that process and the integrity of that process. So those are just, again, standards I lay out, as a context, for the discussion. One final one, Canon 5. A city council member should conduct the affairs of the city council in an open and public manner. And again, this is kind of tying into that open meeting law discussion, which needs to be a part of this. City council members should be aware of the letter and intent of the state's open meeting law, should conduct the affairs of the city council consistent with the letter and spirit of that law, and consistent with the need to inspire and maintain public confidence in the integrity and fairness of city government and the office of the city council member. Again, I just think that's a good, if we start thinking in those terms, I think that we can, have a positive discussion about this. And then the final points that I would like to make is kind of then looking at what our current structure exists, what we're operating under right now. Well, right now, what we're operating under is Robert's Rules of Order. We have actually adopted Robert's Rules of Order, and we've modified it to a certain extent by ordinance, but we have procedures in place that are governing our conduct. And, I looked those up, and the two areas that I think that we need to address and we need to have, again, a good dialogue about is, the public input portion. Because if you look at the public input portion and how we've regulated it, it's a legitimate time, place, and manner restriction. We've put some restrictions on public input. So we've actually created a process for how you give public input at an official public meeting. So what we have to look at is there other public input taking place at the meeting that's acting outside of, that's creating another layer of input that's coming into the council, that's not coming in, in the manner in which we've regulated it by ordinance and through Robert's rules together. And then the second one is council debate and discussion. And that's another area where we've regulated it both through Robert's rules, but we've kind of annotated it, with our own city ordinances. But basically, our procedure is that council debate and discussion occurs after a motion and second on an item. So if there's additional council debate and discussion going on between council members via electronic means, or if there's an opportunity for that to happen, then, I think that's an issue we have to take a look at, because the council debate and discussion should be open and in the public's eye, and it shouldn't be happening any time other than, during that time that's set forth, in Robert's rules and in our ordinance. So those are a couple areas that I've highlighted, again, for discussion. I guess the third one, the third one is the area of what I call multitasking, or conducting other business during the public's meeting. I think that's another area that we need to take a look at. I mean, again, from a decorum standpoint, from an integrity standpoint, from a trust standpoint with the public, I mean, is it proper for us, to be trying to multitask with either personal affairs, private business affairs, other city business affairs, while the public meeting's going on? And I think another issue that we have to be cognizant of is the one of, if we're dialoguing, again, through electronic means, not only about items that are on the agenda in front of it, but if we happen to be dialoguing, via email or other public means about other items, we are in a public meeting, we are a quorum, and if we're discussing public business, we have, an open meeting law issue we probably have to be concerned about. So I'm just raising the issues. I'm trying to set a positive framework for discussion. We get to set policy on that. That's our job. And I'd like to work together with some of you on this. Teresa raised the issue. It was something that was kind of on my long list. I've been kind of observing it. I've been watching other meetings, not only our own, but ourselves at our meetings, and it's just more and more it was kind of on my long list, but it was something that I did think that we should address and we should have a dialogue about. So I would just simply close by saying, okay, it's new technology. It's another phase in an ongoing phase, and there's probably going to be more to come. But I think it's a time, it's at a point where we need to have a good, healthy discussion about it, and need to make some adjustments perhaps to our procedures to make sure that we continue to have that confidence and trust that we want with our relationship with the public. So I would just close by saying that would be my goal, to just try to do this in a way that we focus on, that we're putting something together that really ensures that in confidence, trust, integrity continues to exist for us, because the more that exists, the more that we can do to hold on to that confidence and trust, the better it is for everyone, and the better it is for our city, certainly, because that trust in government really is everything. So I've got some ideas on what I think an ordinance might look like. Teresa's got some ideas on what an ordinance might look like. Our outline is really the come together. Those are really the three issues that we'd like to see addressed in it. How we address them. I'd like there to be a little more to a committee, so if one or two of you would try to work with us on this, I would love to have, like 4 of us working on this, and we can, bring something forward in a working session, or, on a first read, when we have a little more dialogue. So at this point, I'm glad to take any questions that you have, and I know Teresa would too. So.
Okay, thank you, councilors. Any questions or comment? Councilor Sale.
Thank you, Councilor Sober. If you'd go back to the very first slide, if you could, I have a question. Okay, maybe the second slide. There you go. In the bottom statement, electronic communication during council meetings from the public is public input. My question is that a personal opinion, or is that based on statute or ordinance?
Well, and I will answer that, since I'm the one who put it on there. And that would be, I guess that would be an observation I would make, that if someone is during the meeting, if someone's giving you an electronic message, that's public input. And they are able, because someone sitting in that audience, they are able to speak at a certain time. They cannot run up here and whisper something in my ear during the meeting.
Thank you. And because, can I ask the city attorney the same question? Is there any statute or ordinance that would give us definition on my take at this point? Because if there's a statute that says this, then this whole discussion is mute. We have to move to take it out.
Well, and that's why I said at the beginning that the ordinance is silent.
Yeah, I'll just ask the city attorney.
I'm not aware that there's a definition of public input statutorily. I'd have to do some research on that, but as far as I know, there isn't anything in statute that defines what public input is.
Okay, thank you. And the second question would be, can you define for me, this isn't for you, Stace, I'm sorry. One of you two, could you define for me the difference between communication during a meeting, or let's say I want to research a state law to bring up, I have my computer in front of me, I want to research a state law that's germane to a discussion that we have. Are you talking about all electronics are shut off for the whole meeting?
I think that it's the whole discussion needs to be had, and and I've thought about that issue. I think because we have the hard copies of SDCL and the city code in the corner. The city attorney certainly should be able to research law during the meeting, and as issues come up, as I said to them, we've talked to them about this, and I said, a lot of times they can anticipate, but there's always those issues they can't anticipate and aren't prepared for. And so it's been common practice for them to just go, we used to just go grab the book, and nowadays, of course, people look into it. But it is the city attorney's role to be doing the legal research and giving the legal advice.
I appreciate that. And Stacy's probably be hopping a little bit more, because I know that's done while we're up here. Somebody will look up a state law.
And of course,
or
he still has the option of saying, hey, I need more time.
Yeah.
And then we have to defer.
My last question on this, we're talking about electronic communication to the council. What about electronic communications from the council to the public?
I think, for me, we're talking about electronic communication, both ways, in and out.
And that's what I'm referring to as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Kind of along the line of Councilor Sales' questioning, how is any electronic communication that we received days before the meeting or seconds before the meeting from somebody who was unable to attend, how is that any different than receiving electronic communication during the meeting? Is, under this definition, is that not a form of electronic communication?
I think it's a different in the function. When you're at the public meeting, again, the noticed meeting, there's certain procedures that take place. Outside the meeting, there's certain things that are permitted. And I would call that a lobbying function, similar to with the state legislature. I mean, they allow themselves to be lobbied. We allow ourselves to be lobbied, except for quasi-judicial, and then we have to, announce basically the lobbying thing. But I think in that lobbying role, all of that can happen outside the meeting. But when you go into the meeting, just kind of, again, analogous to the legislature, lobbyists can't speak on the floor. They can't come in when they're in there, and the certain rules apply when they're actually in the meeting. And I think that it's really similar to that. So when you actually get in the meeting, then the rules of the meeting would apply. But, all of those things that happen outside the meeting arena, have kind of are a different category of information.
And what about communication between members of the council, whether it's electronic or if I lean over to Councilor Sale and ask him a question? How is that communication any different?
Well, it's different because...
Other than the fact that I'm not using an electronic device when I'm asking Councilor Sale a question.
To me, it's different because it's done in public. The public can see it. If they've got problems with it, that is happening, if there's a dialogue that's going on for a long time and somebody wants to comment on it or criticize it, they can do that because it's something visual that they can actually see.
And I think my last question, I just wanted to follow up with some of Councilor Sale's line of questioning. But the primary question is, and as you know, we've had this discussion before, I'm pretty analytical and I'm very scientific research based. Can you tell me, and the first step is define the problem. Can you define what the problem is?
Well, I think the problem is, again, if you look at Robert's Rules of Order and what's required, in my mind, there's two things that are problematic. And one is, if council members are receiving input from citizens, that aren't present at the meeting, that are present at the meeting, outside the public input realm, I think you've got problems with both your city ordinance and Robert's Rules of Order. And then I think if the council members...
Can you give me some specifics in ordinance or Robert's Rules of Order?
30-015A. That's your public input, and then the council debate discussion is 30.016A.
I guess I'm not following that response. Could you further explain that? How that would be a violation? If we received a electronic communication from somebody, whether they're in the audience or if they're, let's say, they're out of state?
During the meeting?
During the meeting?
Because you've defined what it's, to me, it's public input. It's public input that's coming into the council, and the entire council should, it's part of the public record. It should be part of the public record, and so everybody on the council should have that ability to have that same public input during the meeting
Wouldn't
process.
this limit the public's ability to participate in their government?
Well, if I may jump in, since I'm, so you're talking about selective citizens' ability to petition their government. You're talking about your ability to receive a text from a certain person. Now,
Have that same ability, Counselor.
well, but I'm saying that's one person getting your personal email and responding to you. So it's, whereas the people who are here, and that person could be listening through the meeting, and then they could be responding, giving you feedback, giving you some extra information anytime they wanted to. Whereas if John Doe is sitting here and he has some ideas, he gets one shot at it. He doesn't get to get back up and speak again. People have tried to. We say, no, your time is over.
Doesn't John Doe have the same opportunity to send me the text message?
Well, and this is the issue. That's why we're talking about this, because there is nothing in policy right now.
I'm just asking questions, Counselor, so that I can better understand this.
We don't have a policy right now, so I think that we do know that people are corresponding with members of the council during the meeting. They are sending texts, there are emails happening. And so the question is that an okay thing? That if you happen to have somebody's email address or if you have their cell phone number, that you can be having that dialogue with them? This is why we're having a discussion about it. We may decide, the council may decide at the end of the day that they think that's the good way to do business. I personally don't. And I don't think we should be texting each other during the meetings either. That's my feelings. And I will say, as far as phone usage, the last year and a half or so during the informational meetings, I have taken pictures of the slides and posted them on Facebook right in live time there, because it's a better quality on the slide. I have not had dialogues with people on Facebook at the time. I posted it up there. People make comments. I am willing to give that up. I say, let's put the phones away and just keep it clean. And then we're all kind of listening to what we have, and everybody's playing on the same a level playing field when it comes to getting information. But there's been a lot of texting happening during the meetings. And so again, this is just a discussion we're having at the end. If an ordinance comes forward and we say, well, we just want to keep it the way it is, the majority says that, then that's what would happen. But I think we're talking about setting some definitions here.
I think you're keying in on what the issues are. You are, like, for example, again, in the, if we're going to allow that, are we going to allow we could do it by saying we're going to allow a 10-minute period and let phone calls come in. And we could if we wanted to expand our reach to the public and say it's maybe because of modern technology, we shouldn't be limiting public testimony to those people who can show up. Maybe we should be opening it up, the phone lines, and have them come in. I mean, it's policy. It's in that realm of policy, but it is something I think we need to have, that we need to talk about. What is our practice and our procedure going to be? That's all.
Okay, thank you, but I guess I haven't had it defined to me how this has been problematic in terms of outcomes of this particular council or any other government body.
Well, and if I may say, we don't really know what the outcomes are, because for all we know, a developer who's looking for a rezone has been making comments to 4 or 5 of you during the meetings. We don't know. There's no way to know who's corresponding with who. So votes could have been influenced.
Do you even know if that's taking place?
I don't know that, but right now, the way it's set up,
speculation.
It could happen.
Thank you.
So I don't know why we would even want to.
Thank you. Jim, can you go to the first page, please, of the presentation? The title. I want to choose my words carefully, and I'll piggyback off of Councilor Starr's comments earlier and choose my tone carefully. Well, this is a transparency and communication. It's the first time I've seen this. We asked our director earlier, please submit this on Friday so we can review it and have our questions. And I would ask for the same courtesy if we're going to have that standard for the administration and our directors, that we as counselors would do the same and getting it to us. The only communication I've had on this was a phone call from the Argus leader. I've had zero communication from this, and I find that a little bit frustrating when we talk about communication and transparency. Let's have those conversations and work together. Is this really working together, or is this really trying to pit people against each other in the tone and the fashion that it's been brought forward? And so I find that a little, I'm trying to choose my words carefully and my tone carefully. I've seen counselors leave from this dais and run to the bathroom. We all need to go to the bathroom from time to time, but nothing's stopping anybody from doing a quick interview from talking to someone. I've witnessed it over my 6 years being here on the council. And so if that's the case, then if we need to take different bathroom breaks or figure something out so you can't talk to anyone when people go to the bathroom, I don't know. I know it's getting a little silly, but that's influential as well as when you're walking out there and someone's grabbing you or talking to you on the way to the bathroom. I know that other legislative bodies do it differently. For me, I struggle with, I've done my own research. I can't find it in Robert's rules. I can't find a clear definition. On that next page, it talks about that, per our city attorney, that doesn't state, it's the feeling, the vibe, your interpretation, my interpretation. It doesn't say it legally spelled out, and I'm not seeing that in Robert's rules either. And so I struggle with that as well, that it's not defined. I'm not saying it can't be a policy brought forward, but I don't see it in Robert's rules. And so I'd ask for one of you to get back to us as a council and clearly shake out where it is, not just public input, but all of that with there. I use my computer a lot to do research, whether it's me presenting something and it's a question that someone may have for me. On the drone ordinance, for example, I know there's a lot of questions, and I was quickly typing and trying to find the answers that I didn't know so I could answer that. I do that often, whether it's on my city computer or my iPad or my cell phone, depending on which device isn't dead at the moment. And so for me, it helps me do a better job, and it helps me do a better job for my constituents, is being able to be well versed in my research that I do. I want it to be all-inclusive, that if many of us are self-employed, that if you need to zip out and handle an emergency with work, I don't want it to be just a bunch of retired people. I don't. I don't want it to be only self-employed people. I don't want it to be only men, only women. I want this to be an all-inclusive council, that if you need to answer a call or a text or whatever it is because of your business, I know you're self-employed, I'm self-employed. My phone is my lifeline, and there are times where I have a contractor calling me saying, hey, you've got a water leak, what do you want me to do? I've got to do that. For me to be here in this seat, I have to be able to do that because it is my livelihood. My livelihood depends on it. And so it doesn't happen real often, but from time to time I need to be able to do that. Same thing with my kids. You know, I have to leave my kids from home. I'm not going to have them communicate with Jim. I'm not going to say, text Jim and babysit my kids if there's an issue. So for me, it's not a huge issue. Where I do know that you're asking for our feedback as far as what would you like to see, I 100% would support quasi-judicial items. We have many, many quasi-judicial items that come forward that are liquor licenses. The list goes on and on and on as far as those quasi-judicial defined items. I 100% would be willing to sign on, help, whatever it is for those quasi-judicial items that that is off limits. Legally, it is well-defined. It states you cannot be, you know, if you get an email, you have to either share it and it has to go online. We have to disclose any influence. If you made a trip to the rezone or whatever it is, if you went to the liquor store that is coming in front to see what it looks like, those all have to be disclosed. And I 100% agree that that is an item based on legal background, that is an item that I could compromise on. Thank you.
I would like to just respond to, you know, again, I'll choose my words carefully too. There was no intent to not engage the full council, you know, because I've been unclear since the beginning. You know, when do you bring something to a working session and when do you bring something to an informational? I've been able to get audience with the informational, so for me, it's become, I've kind of ignored the working sessions, and maybe this should have been a working session, but that was the point of putting enough energy together to try to define the issues, you know, to try to raise the discussion. It's at its earliest stage. So I would ask you not to take offense to this. This is the starting point. There isn't.
But it would have been nice to have the presentation shared, just like Director Pritchard's presentation shared, for us to be able to at least review what you're thinking, what you'd like to see. If it's truly inclusive and truly something that we all are going to be working on, then that would have been nice to just have yesterday, Friday, whenever it is. And I know it doesn't always happen that way.
I'm just going to respectfully disagree. The presentation is bullet points. I like to give the full presentation so that there's not a misinterpretation, understanding, so that I can answer the questions and so that people don't make assumptions, you know, without seeing the full thing. So for me, you know, again, there's nothing this isn't, fine-tuned at this point. It's just opening up the discussion, trying to raise the issues. So I would ask you not to take it that way because it certainly wasn't intended. And if you, were you thinking it should have been in a working session? What was the other
Just
way?
having the presentation in advance. No, I'm fine with
Not
the
gonna happen.
informational.
I'm just going to tell you, giving you the presentation is the starting point for me.
Well,
Because
well,
I
and
I'd ask as a council that we are careful with interjecting that on the administration. If the standard for us is not going to be to share a presentation early, then we shouldn't have that same expectation.
well, let me say that we met with the city attorney. This thing is evolving, and we met with the city attorney yesterday to talk about how this thing might look. So actually, in full disclosure here, I wanted to bring this forward as a first reading. Counselor Brecky is the one who said, no, she said, I want to bring this to the council as a working, or as an informational. And just Counselor Erickson backtracking to a year ago when we had the public input ordinance, that thing was smacked on us as a first reading. There was no working session with that. Counselor Selberg called and said, this is where we're going. And then when we had the 50+1% change in how we elect our elected officials, that thing was smacked in as an amendment. There was no working session with that. So that door swings both ways. But I think we brought this forward now to get some input from you. It is not, we haven't firmed anything up yet. But I will also say, Counselor Erickson, I disagree with you. I think people elected us, and maybe when you were running, you didn't say that you had to do personal business during your meetings. But I think people elected us to be giving our full attention to what's happening while we're here. And that's why if we turn the phones off, which I really believe we need to do, and you have personal business, that waits until it's over. We give our full attention to what's at hand here. We aren't texting, and who knows what we're texting about. The other thing is, if this council would say we don't want to do that, then I think, and our City Attorney Stacy Koistra and I have had this discussion, and I just asked him, but I think anything that we're doing during the meeting here needs to be open to the public. So if you're emailing someone, texting someone, that during the meeting, the public has a right to know what we're doing. This is their meeting. They're paying us to be here. We get about $1,400 a month to be here. How many hours are we putting in to earn that money? And the least that we can do is to pay attention and be fully present while we're here and treating all citizens equally. So that means you don't have special, unfettered access to certain council members during the meeting.
Further questions? I would just say if it's called a vote of confidence of each of you, I have never seen or had any hint that everybody in this council is not fully engaged in every meeting. You talk back to when you put pictures on Facebook with that, and it's not particularly the way I do business, but I knew you were doing that as business, and I just know that everybody, when they're here, they're fully engaged and have very thorough, they've done their homework, and when they're here, they're here. And I have not heard one compliment or comment from a constituent ever to the effect that it seems like such and such isn't paying attention, or boy, they're always on their phone. I've heard of none of that. So as far as having to be here and working hard and doing what we're supposed to do, and are we putting the time in, I have seen no evidence to the contrary from any member of this body that is not working their tail off. So I'll address it that way. Anybody else?
Again, our purpose was to, solicit, some involvement. Let's see if we can't, work something out. I would like to hear from a couple of you others to work with us on this. I realized, that bringing this issue forward, it was going to be one that people have strong personal feelings about, but again, it would be my intent to try to do this in such a way that we see it as a collaborative effort and try to find, something that works for all of us.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. Thank you. So we will move on to public comment. If anybody has anything they'd like to speak up about or anything on the agenda today.
Bruce Danielson. Some of us actually have been around public meetings for a long time. In the early 70s, I was working in Pierre when the sunshine laws were first created in South Dakota. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers. They were looking at the information that was available at the time the meeting started. And so it became really important in those days that people have a chance to know what was going on in the meetings. Things were starting to get really opened up. Lawsuits got involved in a lot of this, and some of the meetings I was involved in those days ran into some issues because people weren't being as open as they needed to be. So it's an area of law that has started creating a lot of issues for a lot of individuals and operations, and I think that we need to do something in this body here, because I was thinking about this as I have done text messages with at least 5 of you on this body while it was meeting. I don't do it anymore, and I won't do it anymore. And I've gotten responses back from several of you during these meetings. I have also know that some of the individuals who you are texting in the side are making comments to you because discussions are held away from this room. So I know that you are deeply engaged in some of what's going on. Some of the individuals in this room never respond, and that I am very impressed with because of the situation. But some of the things that I just heard a few minutes ago from some of the members sitting here, being insulted about the way this process runs. Sorry, having a little coordination issue. This was a meeting that was held on December 5th, 2017. The vice chair of the city council handed the mayor her cell phone while I was giving public input. And they had a side discussion during this whole thing. And while I'm standing here talking, I see a bedazzled phone that ends up being passed amongst the chair and vice chair over to the mayor. I have no idea what was being discussed in that little thing, but I was insulted. I have been up here many times, and I have watched members of this body completely ignore what we are doing, what we're talking about. And we work hard to get up here and do what we need to do. One of the comments that has been brought up is there's no state law, there's no Roberts rules. But nationwide, this is becoming quite an issue. And it is now becoming a matter of law. And I will, next time I come and speak about this issue, when that time comes, I will probably have a series of cases that all involve this area of law. And you people will lose, because we'll be passing out what are called notice of claims. And these are going to be issued, and anything that is on your cell phone or on your computer or in your email now becomes subject for any investigation by anybody who's doing a zoning request, standing up here doing public input, trying to do anything with this city. We are going to be making available on the Citizens for Integrity website. They're already out there. Notice of claims ready to go into action. So I just want to let you know that we're preparing and going to be assisting anybody who needs to be assisted in making sure that their rights are upheld. I just want you to remember, everything that you do, standing up here, sitting up here, glaring at us, looking at doing other things, playing with your computers, playing with your cell phones, is all going to be discoverable. And it's happening all over the nation. Just start watching the courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Scott Erisman, Sioux Falls. Just to touch on something that Bruce said, Councilor Kiley said that it's pure speculation at this point. You know, I'm with Bruce on this. I've texted 5 city councilors up here during meetings, and I've gotten responses back from 3 of them. So it's not a point of speculation. I know what's going on. As for your cell phones and your laptops and your other stuff that you all get stipends for, I don't need a city attorney to explain this to me. That is government-owned property, which means I own that property. And anything you do on that property is discoverable, as Bruce just mentioned. And you can laugh about it, Greg, that's fine. But it's when a court starts subpoenaing your cell phones and your laptops for communication that you're doing, you know, I put it to it this way. What if a major developer came in here and was denied a huge rezone, which could cost them millions of dollars, and they saw you guys texting with other people, and they were so angry about their rezone being denied that they decided to go to court over it. And they get to read all these text messages and emails. How would you feel about that? Well, guess what? You don't own that stuff. And it's so simple, too. Just put the phone away for a couple hours. I mean, I didn't get my first cell phone until 15 years ago, and what did we do before them? Well, they prepared themselves for the meetings. They went over the documents before the meetings. You guys get your red notes, a Wednesday before the meeting? You get your red notes, 6 days before the meeting even? You have plenty of time to research everything. You don't need to be texting during the meetings. I also don't need the city attorney to tell me what a public meeting is and what a public meeting is not. When the meeting starts, that's the public meeting. It means you should be hearing public testimony. A text message from somebody, from me or Bruce or anybody else to a counselor, that's not public. But it should be. You know, I knew you guys are going to have all kinds of excuses why you can't do this, modern technology. You know, but you implement rules on us who own the government. We only get 3 minutes and 5 minutes here, and you know, you tell us we can't text and drive, but boy, we can't follow those same rules. Why not? It's not that hard. And I knew the emergency thing was going to come up too. That's a funny one. I was trying to figure this out. In the 15 years I've been watching city council meetings, I can only remember one incident of a city councilor actually leaving a meeting because of an emergency. And someone came over and grabbed them. Their kid went to the hospital or something. I can't even remember, but they left really fast. I can't remember. It's really easy for a family member to call, you know, your operations guy during the meeting if there's an emergency happening, you need to get out of here. He just walks up here and tells you, hey, you need to go. Not that hard. You're here doing our business, not fiddling on your phone, not worrying about if your sink is leaking. You're doing our business. So I think it's a good idea, and as Janet mentioned, this is a starting point. This ain't a first reading. They're just saying, hey, we want your input. Tell us what you don't like. You know, personally, I think it should just be the phones. I think you should have access to your laptops to Google things. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think you should be communicating with other people. I also want to talk about something else where you guys were talking about the budget a little bit. It's always been frustrating for me that the council votes on the budget, but they have no real input in the budget. I've always thought that the mayor should not be setting the budget. The budget should be set by the council with the assistance of the city directors. The city directors should work directly with the council to set up the budget. And the mayor gets to put his input in on his department. That's it. Only his department. You guys are the ones who vote on the budget. Why wouldn't you be setting the budget? And it's kind of in the charter that you're supposed to be doing the budget. I have no idea how all of a sudden it got to become the mayor's job. It's not the mayor's job. It's your guys' job. You know, and it turned into, you know, I think it probably started during Munson, you know, that you guys get to put amendments in. Baloney. You should be doing the budget all together from the beginning. And then you hand it over to the mayor and say, this is our budget, the one that we worked on and the one that we are voting on, not you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, Stephen Ciano. I want to say first that the city attorney's job is indeed, as I understand it, to advise you people and other city employees, but is also secondarily to defend the public. And as I've said, you can't serve two masters. I would hope that he is informed and agrees with me as to this fact. I've heard such mentioned differently by my predecessors here, but they're making the same point. There's been a couple things in the past, like limiting the public input was an attack on our ability to present. As I've said, it is an attack on our free speech and our right to redress of grievances. And no accommodation has ever been made for the fact that of my disability making it difficult for me to come here. A lot of times I'm actually unable to get here and to present. And I do so better in letters, or I have, and yet these have not gone public. And I've repeatedly said this, and I was told by Mr. David that, oh, we don't do this. Well, how about we start? How about, and this is what I'm pleased to hear is being proposed, that we're going to have emails, written letters, whatever correspondence to you people serving the public. They're out there for the public on a public posting, bulletin board, whatever, how you're going to do it online, and perhaps in paper too, in paper form too. But you can legislate this. And when people do not do their job, they can be held accountable financially. You get paid to provide a service to the public. You fail to do this, like I've said, can't serve two masters. You're acting as an agent for the other side against the public. That's also a criminal offense, as I've pointed out before too. I'm glad other people realize this as well, such realities. As for the cell phone issue, well, yeah, maybe we ought to make it clear that we should write a law against legislation while distracted. And you'd be pulled over and ticketed. I'm also concerned, if we're talking about transparency, how come we have a mayor here who ran on the platform of transparency and has done nothing, as I see it, but suppress transparency. And I see I'm concerned about the poor quality of the video when I look online. I don't know what that's about, but I do think that different angles should be included in the presentation, the video presentation. I've also seen you people recuse yourself for apparently minor things when people that know that they are connected to my issue in particular, where I'm being discriminated against for my beliefs and my disability by personnel in the city, it appears, in denying me my medical needs, including acquisition of financial support through VA. It can be done, but instead I get told I don't have any rights. I have to go to the VA. VA has refused me for 40 years. When all you have to do is look at the naval record and you see where my disability began, because I was attacked for my beliefs in the military and for being labeled homosexual. And the other thing that you've done against public input, obviously, was mentioned, the 50+1. That I consider to be also unlawful due to procedural violation. Let's see. Okay, well, that's enough. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair.
A motion?
I have a motion to enter into executive session, consulting with legal counsel or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2, parent 3.
Second, Nicer.
Motion by Erickson, seconded by Neitzer. And a roll call, please.
Sorry. Councilmember Brecky.
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
Kylie.
Yes.
Nitzert.
Yes.
Selberg.
Yes.
Sale.
Yep.
Starr. Yes. Staley.
Okay, we'll move into executive session. Ask everybody to please clear the premises.